Why the nickname Poncho?
The nickname Poncho came from actually an old TV show called The Cisco Kid. He had a sidekick named Poncho. My dad thought it'd be cute to name me Poncho, but I'm actually a junior. And I'm a second generation artist, so I started using my nickname kind of to separate me and my father's work.
So your father's also an artist?
Yes, he is a practicing artist. He's a teacher too for the Baltimore City School System.
My father is also.
Okay. Yes, my father is also an artist. I'm a second generation artist. He was doing it in high school, and then he got into printing, and he teaches at Baltimore City Schools.
So you've been an artist all of your life?
I have been an artist for 24 years. I started when I was about 17 years old. The Guardian actually was created. It's actually the second part of my Angel series. The first part is Heaven Sent, and actually I got the whole series from just the notion of reading most Bibles and biblical stories, and they never showed any depictions of African American angels. I had a big problem with that. I mean, you might find an African American child, but you would very seldom, almost ever, see an African American male. So I decided to devote a whole series to just making different types of images of African American male angels. The Perseverance Totem series, well, I have a series of totems that consist of about maybe 10 different paintings. The Perseverance, it had a counterpart to it, and it was called the Power Totem. And they're basically Adinkra symbols and African kente patterns within the piece. And each one of the pattern areas means something specific. Most of it deals with wisdom, strength, unity, family. And so each totem symbolically means something different in each pattern area. To me, white depicts a bunch of different things, particularly in my black and white pieces, my Perseverance series. The white represents the oppressive side of our existence in a white world, pretty much, and how we have had to persevere through so many different things. I like to use the space because I like to challenge the mind as to whether he's being enslaved or whether he's free, and it really depends on the state of the person when they view it as to what it represents for them. Peace of Mind is a series that I started probably back in 1988. Probably my most popular piece is Black is Black, and it deals with different shades of African Americans. I have very, very light-complected people in my family and very, very dark people in our family. And we always talk about racism outside of our group, but we do it within our own group. So I started doing that series of pieces just to kind of bring people closer together so we can realize that we're all the same people. I have a short attention span. I guess right now they would call that like something different in the psych realm, but I don't concentrate on things. I have a short attention span, so usually it takes me about 72 hours to complete a piece from start to finish. But usually I'm working on 10 to 15 pieces at one time. Embrace is a popular piece too. That came out probably in 1992. I do a lot of pieces that deal with families. In the African American contemporary movement right now, most of the pieces are of women and children. You don't see a lot of men, and you don't see a lot of family-oriented pieces. So I try to devote a lot of time to doing full families in pieces versus just mother and child. I know that our society is a reflection of who we are. But at the same time, you can also instill some of the answers to some of the problems we have by depicting full families. Right now they run as low, on the originals, as low as 600 and as high as 50,000.
Most of them still tell there.
Yeah, most of my older pieces, I had a big fire in 1995 where I lost everything I've created from age 8 up to 1995. And that represented close to $2 million worth of stuff that was lost. I'm talking about transparency, slides, everything. I was in the big Holland Street Exchange fire. So most of the pieces that predate that fire are in the $20,000 to $50,000 range right now. But I also do current pieces that are small, 8.5 by 11 pieces that start with around the $600 price range. So the older the pieces are, the prices are a lot higher.
Okay, just something that came about.
No, most of them usually. Whenever I start a series, I don't preconceive a series. Sometimes I'll do a piece, and if I feel like I want to say more, I'll do a second piece. And a lot of times I like to work in a series because it makes you, really work with the whole concept. The Perseverance series started with a piece called Surrender. And that piece was the first piece I did after my fire in 1995. And it really depicts my overall feeling of what I went through that fire. If you look at him, he's in a ball, he's in a fetal position, he's surrendering himself to God, kind of. And if you look inside of it deeply, there's a Adinkra symbol called Ginyame in there. And it means fear no one except God. And that symbol is superimposed over his body. And if you look at the edges are burned. That's because after I finished painting this piece, I took it outside and I actually burned it into a circle, because that was kind of how I felt at the period of that fire. So that really started my Perseverance series. And then after a while, I started really looking at linking that to our existence and our pre-existence as slaves. And so the series really took on its own little life after that. The piece Heaven Sent for me is a real interesting piece. Again, it was the first part of my angel series, and I told you that my whole frustration with my religious background was that they never, I mean, we are even stereotypical when it comes to our view of angelic forms. That's really deep when your angelic forms have to be a certain color and complexion. But Heaven Sent is also an interesting piece because when I conceptualized doing the piece, I did two sketches originally. One was of a white model, one was of a black model. And it was interesting to me when showing them to people, everyone thought that the black angel was the fallen angel. And so I thought that was really interesting, that we can even be prejudicial even in our view of certain symbols. Okay? And also I made him come down just to kind of mess with the eye. People often think it's upside down, but the title is Heaven Sent. So I really wanted people to get into the concept of what I was trying to say. Whenever we talk about angels, we all have our own personal view of what angels represent for us. And so I want to really challenge people to, address that notion of what they feel about angelic forms. Okay. The blackness was the second part of my Perseverance series. And I really wanted to try to collect, to come up with a concept of a male that was free, but looked like he was still in bondage. And to see what groups of people would think he was enslaved and what group of people would think he wasn't enslaved. I also later did that piece in published form with a black background, which had a total different meaning. So again, I'm just challenging people's notions. I tend in my work to try to merge African theology and African American theology and history together, because a lot of times African Americans, we don't really feel a part of the African experience, and so we can look at African art and appreciate African art, but we don't feel like we're a part of it. So my work is trying to bridge the gap between the two. So a lot of times I will fuse both things at one time.
In the piece?
No, actually the whole Perseverance series is done in black and white. And so it's a fusing of charcoal drawing and airbrushing. And that's something that I kind of came up with over the last 5 years, putting the two of them together. They merged together pretty well.
Okay, now for people that don't really know a lot about the difference between that sort of.
As far as mediums go, I like all mediums. I like dry mediums, wet mediums. That means charcoal, pastel, pencil, ink, acrylic. I mean, I do all of it. Most of my work consists of acrylic because it dries fast. So a lot of times I'll do acrylic pieces with a mixture of other mediums. The majority of my pieces, however, in the earlier days, because I was an illustrator, was full airbrush pieces. And that's just an apparatus that sprays paint, kind of like on the principle of an aerosol can. But as time went on, I began to merge some of my drawing techniques with airbrushing to give it more of a textural feel. So when you look at a lot of my Perseverance series, it really looks like skin. It's because you're mixing those two techniques together. Whereas if I did it as just plain airbrush or acrylic airbrush on board, it would be so smooth you wouldn't get any texture. And that's the one thing I didn't like about airbrushing. But now I found a way to get texture from using airbrush. That's a tribal dance.
Tribal dance.
Yes. Tribal dance came from I did a dance series of probably about maybe 15 or 16 paintings. Back in the early 80s, when most artists were beginning to put their portfolios together for the African American art movement, a lot of the subjects were jazz, family, southern scenes, slavery scenes. And I didn't want to jump on the bandwagon of the subjects that everybody else wanted to deal with. A lot of people jumped on jazz because it's more of a universal type subject matter. So I thought, well, dance, because I was always intrigued by dance. I was always intrigued by some of the black dance companies, Alvin Ailey and Phil Danko and so forth. So I decided to devote a whole series to doing dance pieces. Ancestral spirits is kind of, when I was in art school, they would always make reference to Picasso and how Picasso used African art to come up with a lot of his stylizations. And I can understand that, having been to Africa and different regions in Africa. When you see African masks, the work is already done. Okay, it's already been thought out. It's already been conceptualized. So I just said, well, if Picasso can do a series of abstracted masks, why can't I? I mean, I have a whole series and collection of masks that I've been collecting for probably 15 years. And I began to do abstraction of those pieces from the Ivory Coast and from Ghana and so forth. So I really started having fun with them, and people have really gotten a big kick out of those pieces.
Do you feel that?
I think that everybody should. I mean, everybody should want to tap into their origins, just like if you didn't know your parent, you want to see your parent. I mean, it really depends on where you are in your personal life, where you are in your worldview. For me, going back there was energetic for me. It really helped my work. It helped my relationship with my son, who went on a trip with me, went to Ghana on our first trip. And so, no, I think that I would tell all artists to go there because you understand that art has another purpose. You know, sometimes we have a European view of what art is supposed to be, how it's supposed to be managed, and so forth. But when you go to a place like Africa and you see it's part of everyday life, you know, it's a whole different experience. So you get to add that whole element to your own work and kind of find out where your aesthetics lie. To the Rhythm. To the Rhythm is also one of my dance pieces. I guess once I sat down one day and looked at all of my body of work and realized that all artists have a couple of habits. All artists are attracted to certain numbers, and I'm attracted to the number 3. Why? I don't know. I'm one of 3 siblings, so that could be it. So when I look at the majority of my pieces, they usually would have 3 images in it. Also because I'm right-handed, most of my images would face a certain direction. All artists have this problem. But it just so happens with the dance series, I decided to have fun with it. And I said, well, I wanted to start with one central image and then continue. And so my second one had 2, my third one had 3 images, my fourth one had 4 images. And I kept on going until I got to 15 images in one piece. So it's me just challenging the notion of falling into that natural point of using 3 images.
As far as advice to students that are aspiring artists?
My advice to aspiring artists is a real back-to-basic approach. I think that, number 1, not enough artists are doing art. They can theorize about art, they can glorify about being an artist, but when you look at their portfolios, they haven't done any work in a year. You know, so before I start talking about talent, because I don't think talent is a requirement, I've seen artists with no talent have the desire and the dedication and do well as a career. So again, it's back to basics. Work, work, work. Let the work dictate your direction rather than you trying to figure out what direction you want to go. Because by doing that, you accomplish more than one thing. And I meet so many artists now that are using the whole computer age as a crutch. In other words, if I snatched that computer off the wall, they would no longer be an artist. Most of them are not taking pride in why they're really here. And that's to hone their skills. They really want to challenge the teachers. They have these slick portfolios that are just computer generated. And because I come from an age where the computer wasn't being used, I can always look at a person's portfolio, no matter how slick it is, and tell them exactly where they are in their development. So you can't get around practice. You've always heard practice makes perfect. When you get to college, it's no different. I mean, just because you pay to come here doesn't mean that all of the answers are going to fall out. You know, you have to devote your time in order to see results. It's what you put in the bank that you can go back and get. Well, back in 1980, I was a sign writer. And sign writer, basically, I went to a vocational high school, and we learned how to do lettering. So every sign you read outside was done by a letterer. I never had to worry about money. And we would always joke when the computer was coming in that what the computer would be able to take over and not take over. And we basically watched the whole sign industry get taken over by the computer. Because rather than the lettering we used to do on windows and trucks and billboards and so forth, now they computer generate those images and they cut it out of film and they stick it on like adhesive. So that got rid of a whole age. And if you look at the printing industry alone, they've gone through 4 or 5 major revolutions. So when I start talking about the computer's a tool. That's all it is. If you put a computer geek at one table and you put an artist at one table and you train them to do the same program, you can see a direct difference and a different correlation with the artist because you're using a different conceptual edge and a different creative energy than the computer geek would. But the problem now is that computer geeks are getting commercialized jobs because they're familiar with the program. So it really challenges artists to find a way to separate themselves from the masses because now, 10 years ago, out of 10 homes, maybe one home had a computer, where now it's the reverse. It's probably one that doesn't have a computer out of the 10. So if everybody's got a computer, then how are you going to separate yourself amongst all the other people that can sit home and play with the computer? So it's got its pluses, and it has just as many negatives. But in the end, it's how much work you put into it and your knowledge of it that makes you better than the other person.
Any final words, anything else you want to add to that?
My final words is that, I've been devoting more time to black institutions like Morgan State University. I see other institutions such as Howard, which have taken a lot of pride in their art department. And I've been watching Morgan grow over the last 10 years. My first illustration job I got here at Morgan. When Bill Cosby came here, I got an opportunity to do the poster for that show. And so my roots are here. I used to live like 3 blocks down the street. I never went to Morgan because I went to the Merlin Institute. But I feel a need now to come back and try to help and assist with them trying to put their visual arts department together. Because, sometimes you can have a beautiful building and a wonderful setting, but your focus still not be on the visual arts. And not too many institutions right now have a museum of the magnitude of this museum. And it's funny, I did a lecture here about 3 weeks ago. And I told the kids any chance I get a chance to badmouth them, that I would. That out of 50 students, I asked them how many of them had been to the museum, and 3 hands came up. So I think that we get very jaded. I think we lose track of what things are for. If I asked them how many of the shows they've gone to in this same building, whether it be entertainment or theater, more hands would probably have rose. But very few of them walk through the museum and they're in the visual arts department. And I think that whole jaded nature is kind of what we need to address. Right now in high schools, middle schools, as we speak, art programs are being destroyed. Art goes before music. Art goes before dance. Art goes before theater. They're trying to change all students into a technological age anyway. So where there used to be art classes, there are computer labs. My question is, where are the artists going to get a chance to be nurtured in the future? So most of the kids now that are in these school programs that are frustrated with their development really need to take advantage of this time, because it may not turn back again.